Hey guys, welcome back. This is Dan Hornacek with Leading on the Frontlines podcast. Excited to be back, episode 4. We're going to take a slightly different approach today. We're not going to talk about maybe necessarily a leadership topic that's like the standard, style or whatever. But one thing I want to talk about today is, well, I guess it is a type of management, but um, I want to talk about self-reflection. A lot of the podcasts I've mentioned this quite a bit, and in the post on my Instagram and Twitter, or X now I should say, has been kind of circling around self-reflection as a manager and as a leader. and and you'll have to excuse me a little bit this episode. I kind of come down with something, so a little congestion might have some costs and stuff. So apologize for that. But a couple things I want to talk about is when you think about yourself or the type of leader that you want to be, I think it's a valid point to sit there and say, how do you go ahead and motivate your team to do things right? We've talked about servitude. We talked about empathy. We've talked about a few different things as far as saying it's my fault. These are kind of the topics we've talked about so far. But does that, and that's great, right? I think it's good to kind of talk through these things and have fun ideas and really try to pinpoint different styles and tactics to use to lead effectively. But I think a real key piece, again, this kind of falls back on the self-reflective part of it, is what type of manager or leader have you been? Let's really take a deep dive on the self-reflection of up to this point today. How do you get your team to get things done? And one of the sad facts is with title comes just respect because of your title, right? So people are going to treat you a certain way. They're going to talk to you a certain way. They're going to open doors for you. Things are going to happen just because you are the director of operations, or you're the operations manager, or you're a CFO. I mean, it doesn't matter necessarily the position, just that when you are in a higher level or like a frontline management position, you know these come with certain levels of respect, positional respect. um, Now, what you do with it, that's kind of like the starting point of what type of leader you are, right? Because you can go ahead and talk about all these different leadership styles and servant leadership, or behavioral based management, empathy, all these different things, right? But that doesn't really you know classify the type of manager you are unless you're doing these things. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is an era of management that we need to end, right? This is something that came up from the boomers. Really took this type of management style, and not that it didn't serve its purpose, but they really kind of took it a little further than it needed to be as far as the cultural aspect of what the workplace has turned into. And what I'm referring to is authoritative management. I'm the manager. You do what I say. If you don't, there's consequences. And that's pretty much it. Like, in a nutshell, authoritarian management. And one of the and I've done a lot of self-reflecting, like with the podcast and kind of my messaging and things that I want to accomplish with what we're doing here. And you know in my opinion, it needs to end today. Right? I think there comes a time where, like, I am the manager. I need you to either follow my instruction, or there's kind of like the standard set of things, like you need to be here on time, right? I mean, that kind of comes as a given, right? You need to come on time, you need to listen to direction, things like that. But when we're talking about, like, the things we have been, it's goal setting, attaining higher level performance with employees, retention, all these things, kind of the below surface level of just your metrics, those items. What's happening is, and I think we're seeing it as a culture, especially here in America, that the "I'm your boss, you need to work harder because I say so" mentality it's still prevalent. And I think we're seeing that. I think But one of the cool things is I think we're seeing a pushback against it, which is good. I think that leadership, and hopefully a lot of you agree with me here, leaders need to be held accountable just as much, if not more, than the employees doing the work. Right? We have, as leaders, more on our shoulders. We have more responsibilities, but we also take that on. Right? Taking on a management role, you're taking on the fact that you have to wear different hats. You have to, look at each employee differently as having individual needs and whatnot. And up until, realist that I can remember, up until about 5-10 years ago, the I'm going to yell at you because I'm your boss, and you're going to feel bad because you're the employee and didn't, hit your goals. Um, though that was still very prevalent, and I think that's wrong. I think it sends the wrong message. I think it's telling people that, you know your worth to the company is strictly based on your performance. And I mean, that is very true to a certain aspect. But again, kind of tying it back to how, you have a responsibility as a leader. If you just put someone in a position and yell at them because they're not doing the right way, or they're not performing at a peak performance level, if you're not sitting there questioning yourself, wondering if they're in the right position, if they've been trained correctly, all the things we've kind of touched on so far, you're failing. I mean, where's your reprimand as the manager? Yeah, of course you're not performing to the metric goals and things like that, but I think it's an important piece of the puzzle of, authoritative, management, just doesn't really work anymore. I think people are too aware of themselves. They're, not to sound too, too whatever, but I think people are just more in touch with their feelings. And, you know, part of that responsibility from a leadership perspective is like, these people see you almost more than they see their own families. Speaking for myself, I work 8 to 5 every day. I come home, I see my children for, a couple hours before bed. And then outside of the weekend, that's all I get. So my employer gets me for 9 hours every single day. I get my kids for 2. That's kind of a cruddy trade-off if you really think about it. So if I'm being talked to in a manner that is disrespectful to me as the employee, or if I feel like my worth isn't there, that's kind of cruddy for the majority of my day to be in a situation where I'm feeling that way. And that's why I say we need to be self-aware as leaders, because you know I'm spending 9 hours a day there. And I'm sure there's some of you out there that spend even longer, 10 or 12-hour days. When I was in the landscape industry, I was working 14-hour days. And so then you go home, and then what? Right? You're there with your family, and you're bringing home how your manager made you feel. Right? We need to recognize that, not, and this is not an arrogant way, but we need to recognize that, like, the power that we have, in the sense that you might just think about it as, I don't care, we're at work. Well, you need to understand that work doesn't stay at work, regardless of going home and doing actual work for the company. Sure, you might go home, you might not have a business cell phone, you might not have email or anything, excuse me, anything remotely tying you to your job. But the way you're making your employees feel, right? And this is very, very critical when you're having maybe more of a negative conversation, or maybe more of like a consequential conversation with an employee. I think it's important to keep in mind that, like, you want to have an impact, right? You want to get your point across as the manager, but at the same time, you have to remember that, like, these are people with feelings and lives. And, yes, they're not hitting the metric, let's say, or they were tardy, or they skipped a day. And that's absolutely a conversation to have. And that's definitely something you need. If you need to reprimand them, you reprimand them. But I think we need to be aware of ourselves in the way we talk to people, in the sense that you don't own them. You don't own these people who work for you. And, these people are going to come back tomorrow, and the next day, and hopefully the next day, and the next day. And if you want to continually get good work out of them, do you think you're going to get better work out of them by, making them feel terrible, or do you think you're going to get better work out of them by them understanding where you're coming from, you figuring out what needs they might not be having met in regards to training or position or what have you? Which one do you think is going to be better? And I think that a challenge that I pose for all people in any management position. You could be a brand new manager today, or you could be a 30-year manager who manages hundreds of people. It really doesn't matter. I think what matters is when you go home, the people who you touched at work, what are they going home at? Are they going home feeling, completely dejected? Are they feeling, unmotivated? There's going to be times. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here saying we need to make everybody happy and live in la la land. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that the delivery of a message, positive or negative, is going to have an impact on this person. And do you really want your impact as their manager, as their leader, right? Is really how people refer to managers, as leadership, right? Do you want them to think of you as a tyrant, as an authoritarian, like dictator, right? These are terms that are thrown around in a lot of employee circles, and you know, if you don't care, right? If you're like, oh, I don't really give a damn if they think I'm a tyrant, then you really shouldn't be a manager. You shouldn't be in charge of people, right? What have we learned about tyrants in history, and what kind of wake they leave? We need to sit there and understand that yes, work is work, absolutely, but work is performed by humans, and not all of it, right? There's AI and robots, of course, but that's not what we're talking about here. So, I'm going to keep this brief today. I just think that because again, I'm not feeling the best, but this has been on my mind all week, and I'm sure it's been reflected in my messaging on Instagram and X, and I want all of us, as kind of a recap, going into, it's going to be Thursday when this posts. Let's reflect a little bit Thursday and Friday and say, what kind of manager am I? And have a real conversations with ourselves. Am I trying to provide value? Am I trying to provide benefit? Am I trying to build my team up, even when we might not be the best, right? Am I trying to be there for my team? Or am I threatening them? Am I using intimidation tactics? Am I telling them to do things just because I said so, right? These are two very different sides of the coin. And, if you're on the latter, I think you need to reevaluate where you're coming from, because again, authoritative management needs to come to an end. I just think that it's time, and there's never been a better time than now. And so what we're going to do here is really talk about ways to end that, if that's where you are. We'd love to hear your opinions. Again, please feel free to leave a review and a rating. I would love to hear from you guys. Catch me on Instagram. It's the same handle as the podcast, Leading on the Front Lines. And would love to see you guys comment on my posts. We'd love to hear your ideas. Throw me a DM. If you guys just want to talk in private, happy to help anybody I can, and I'm excited to keep going. So again, this is Dan Hornacek, Leading on the Front Lines. See you guys out there.